December 25th, 1776. The Delaware River was a torrent of black ice and swirling snow. Standing in the bow of a Durham boat, General George Washington commanded what remained of the Continental Army, less than 2,400 men from an original 6,000. Behind him on the Pennsylvania shore, blood from their bare feet stained the snow. Enlistments would expire in 11 days. The American experiment, not even a year old, was hours from extinction. The British High Command, comfortably billeted in New York, had already written the rebellion's obituary. General William Howe saw Washington's force as rabble in arms. The British redcoat, disciplined, bayonet-wielding, backed by the most powerful empire on earth, was the pinnacle of European warfare. Their German Hessian mercenaries, now garrisoned in Trenton, shared this contempt. What they derided was the Continental Army itself, undisciplined, ununiformed, perpetually undersupplied. While British regiments moved in precise, devastating lines, Washington's men fought in loose, chaotic formations that European officers considered cowardly. They lacked bayonet training for close-quarter combat. The world saw not an army, but a protest that had gotten violently out of hand. What General Howe, sipping wine in New York, could not comprehend was that he faced a new kind of force, animated not by king and country, but by an idea, a radical notion of liberty that, while fragile, was unyielding. This force wasn't designed to win a traditional war, it was built to survive, to endure, and to outlast the very will of the empire it challenged. The transformation began that frozen Christmas night. As the nor'easter howled, Washington's men completed the impossible crossing. They marched 9 miles through the blizzard, their powder soaked, their muskets useless. Victory or death was the password. At Trenton, they struck with cold steel, capturing nearly 1,000 prisoners with minimal losses. It was not tactical brilliance. It was an act of sheer, desperate will. Trenton, followed by Princeton, revealed a truth Washington had known in his bones. This war would not be won by holding ground, but by holding nerve. The British sought to destroy his army in one grand climactic battle. Washington's genius was to never let them. The army itself was the weapon, and its survival was the strategy. The British response was predictable. In 1777, General John Burgoyne launched a grand pincer from Canada, aiming to sever rebellious New England from the rest. It was textbook European strategy designed to crush the insurgency between two hammer blows. But the American wilderness was not the European plain. The textbook didn't account for militia who harried his every step through roadless, sprawling terrain. While Burgoyne slogged south, Howe sailed to capture Philadelphia, the revolutionary capital. He succeeded gloriously. But in doing so, he left Burgoyne isolated, the fatal flaw of British command, arrogance that bred strategic incoherence. They were fighting for cities. The Americans were fighting for a cause. Near Saratoga, New York, American forces under General Horatio Gates surrounded Burgoyne's depleted army. The British professional, trained for open-field volleys, was confounded by Americans firing from behind trees and earthworks. On October 17, 1777, Burgoyne surrendered his entire army. The unbeatable British had been beaten. Saratoga sent shockwaves across the Atlantic, proving to a skeptical world, particularly France, that the American cause was viable. The French crown, eager to wound its ancient rival, saw opportunity. French recognition, followed by their navy, treasury, and army, transformed the conflict from colonial rebellion into global war. Valley Forge brought the ultimate test. The Continental Army fought not the British, but starvation, disease, and despair. Men died from typhoid and exposure. Yet here, in this crucible of suffering, the rabble was forged into a professional fighting force. Baron Friedrich von Steuben arrived, a Prussian drill master of questionable pedigree but undeniable genius. He found an army that moved by instinct rather than command. With profanity, passion, and patience, he drilled them. He simplified the manual of arms, creating a system faster and more flexible than the British. He taught them to use the bayonet aggressively. He gave them pride. When the Continental Army emerged from Valley Forge in spring 1778, it was reborn. No longer militia, it was a professional army that could march with precision, load with lethal speed, and stand toe-to-toe with British regulars. The laughingstock had become a disciplined, resilient force. The war shifted south, where the British believed loyalist sentiment ran strong. They captured Savannah and Charleston, inflicting devastating defeats. But their tactic of offering pardons, then breaking them with harsh reprisals, ignited brutal civil war. The conflict descended into savage guerrilla struggle. Commanders like Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, and Thomas Sumter emerged. Their partisan bands moved like ghosts through Carolina backcountry. They didn't stand in lines. They struck supply trains, terrorized loyalist militias, and vanished into terrain they knew intimately. The British Army, a heavy instrument of conventional war, was bled by 1,000 cuts. Lord Cornwallis, charged with subduing the South, won battles but couldn't hold land. His victory at Camden was hollow, his pursuit of Nathaniel Greene futile. At Cowpens, Daniel Morgan used British contempt for American militia to brilliant effect, orchestrating a tactical masterpiece that annihilated an elite British detachment. Cornwallis made a fateful decision. He would march north into Virginia, aiming to force a decisive confrontation. He believed he could win the war with one final crushing victory. He was chasing the same phantom that had eluded Howe for years. Washington saw his opportunity. He orchestrated a masterful deception, feigning an attack on New York. Then, with breathtaking speed, he combined his Continentals with French forces under Rochambeau and force-marched south, over 400 miles in 15 days. Cornwallis, believing himself safe, fortified at a sleepy tobacco port on the Virginia Peninsula, Yorktown. He awaited resupply by the Royal Navy. It was the final, fatal miscalculation. The French alliance delivered its ultimate dividend. Admiral de Grasse sailed from the Caribbean and defeated British relief forces in the Battle of the Chesapeake. The invincible Royal Navy was turned back. Cornwallis was trapped. The instrument of Britain's global power had been momentarily but decisively bested. Washington and Rochambeau laid siege with the precision von Steuben had drilled into them. Artillery emplaced, parallel trenches dug. For days, relentless bombardment hammered British defences to rubble. The once proud redcoats were cornered, pounded by the very guns they had mocked. On October 14th, 1781, the Allies stormed two critical redoubts. Alexander Hamilton led a brilliant silent bayonet charge on Redoubt 10, a stunning demonstration of what the Continental Army had become. The fight was swift and brutal. The American bayonet, once useless, had become a weapon of victory. With defences shattered and no hope of escape, Cornwallis surrendered his entire army of over 7,000 men on October 19th. News travelled to Britain, where Prime Minister Lord North received it as he would have taken a ball in his breast, exclaiming, "Oh God, it is all over!" The mathematics were undeniable. The British public was weary of this costly, distant war. The Empire, though still powerful, couldn't muster the will to send another army to subdue a continent that had proven it couldn't be held by force alone. The Continental Army had achieved its purpose. It had outlasted the will of its enemy. The true architects of victory were the common soldiers, farmers, blacksmiths, apprentices who had endured the unendurable. They had frozen at Valley Forge, starved at Morristown, bled at Brandywine. Their resilience was the bedrock upon which independence was built. They were the steel in the American sword. The Treaty of Paris in 1783 formally recognized the United States of America. The derided rebellion had systematically dismantled the most powerful military establishment of its age. The object of contempt had become the instrument of a new world order. What began as protest over taxes and representation had evolved into revolutionary war for a radical idea: that sovereignty resides not with a monarch, but with the people. The ragged army that once fled New York had become the guardian of that idea. The legacy wasn't just in battles won, but in precedents set. It was an army answering to civilian authority, a deliberate rejection of European military dictatorships. When the war was won, Washington didn't seize power. He appeared before Congress and resigned his commission, an act that stunned the world. The British weren't defeated by a superior military machine, but by a new kind of warfare. National liberation fought with guerrilla tactics, strategic patience, and unwavering political cause. Their brilliant European tactics were rendered obsolete by the vastness of the land and the depth of American resolve. The sound that haunted the British wasn't the ordered volley of massed muskets, but the crack of the Kentucky long rifle from unseen woods, the silence of deserted countryside, and the defiant cheers of men who crossed a frozen river on a desperate gamble. It was the sound of a people determined to be free. The statistics were stark. the longest war in American history until Vietnam, an estimated 6,800 Americans killed in action, with up to 17,000 more dying from disease as prisoners of war, a sacrifice that forged national identity. Victory hinged on synergy. The perseverance of the Continental Army, the harassment of militia, the brilliance of foreign officers like Lafayette and von Steuben, and the indispensable intervention of the French Navy. It was a triumph of alliance and adaptation. The British made another critical miscalculation that history often overlooks. They underestimated the American riflemen. While British muskets were accurate to 50 yards, frontier rifles could kill at 300. Entire British officers' corps were systematically decimated by backwoodsmen they never saw. A psychological terror that shattered the rigid command structure European armies depended upon. The American Revolutionary War entered combat as disorganized protest, an object of imperial derision. By the time the last British soldier departed, it had become the most feared political force in the Western world. A republic, born in battle, whose very existence threatened every crown in Europe. The laughter of General Howe in 1776 died with surrender at Yorktown in 1781. In between, the unwavering resolve of citizen soldiers, the genius of an elusive commander, and the power of a revolutionary ideal had rewritten the rules of power and forged a nation. The thunder of the revolution had spoken, and the world would never be the same.